In this video, we're going to discuss the digital forensic process, and this is really just an overview. Now, okay, we're kind of back to collecting the evidence. So every single item coming out of a suspect or a victim's location must be identified and labeled. And by the way, law enforcement who are actually doing this isn't the cop on the beat. These are very specific people in law enforcement that are trained to gather evidence. And so they're very skilled by nature in doing this. And this process of gathering the evidence and collecting it and then documenting is called bag and tag. So in a larger investigation, you have a law enforcement officer at the door with a computer and a printer and labels. And so everything that comes out of the victim's or suspect's location will be documented by this person at the door. So you can fill out evidence online and print labels at the same time. So it's important to accurately count and identify the evidence. Don't say there were 5 thumb drives when there were really 10 or there were really 3, because that gives something to the defense attorney to argue about. So it should have the case number, so that should already be done. You don't bring back the evidence and then get the case number. The case number should already exist. And then a brief description, as we've seen before. It should have your signature, so you can verify that it was you or whoever collected the evidence. And that should be on each evidentiary item in the bag and tag. And the date and the time that the evidence was collected. And it's also important to photograph the crime scene. And I'm sure if you've ever watched a NCIS or CSI where they're at the crime scene, photographs are taken. So this also applies for digital forensics, not just the dead body laying there and the blood and the Glock 19 laying there or the knife that was used in the crime, but even it was just a digital forensics case. But you should take pictures of the crime scene and then gradually get closer to the evidence. And you also want to take a picture of the computer screen, because that documents the fact that not only was the computer running, but also any application that's running on the screen and also where the computer was located. You also want to take a picture of the back of the computer to show that the cables were connected. You never want to get to a point where the defense attorney can say, "Your Honor, I know the computer was running, but it wasn't even connected to the internet." Well, if there's an Ethernet cable running out of the back, well, yes, it was connected to the internet or had the capability to connect to the internet. These are some actual bags that are used for particular types of crimes. This is from a company that actually sell these. They used to use these for grocery bags, but they're actually made for law enforcement. And these are mainly used for when you have something wet. For example, blood or bloody shirt or anything like that, so that the evidence isn't contaminated. But for digital devices, they are usually in some kind of polyethylene bag that looks like this. And this is an actual hard drive you see here in a law enforcement bag. Got one in here. There we go. This is an actual bag. So at one point in time, when I was the assistant director for digital evidence at the National Center for Forensic Science, these are some of the bags that we used to use. And so you would see this is a polyethylene bag. It says evidence on it. It's got documentation on it, and it's kind of difficult to read, but this is the kind of bag that you would use for digital evidence. And then you would put one piece of digital evidence for each bag and then document that on the bag. Who took it, where you took it from, the case number, and so on. It's also a good idea, if possible, to try to photograph the serial numbers or other identifying features. Actually, I would think that you also have to document that on the bags and the tags, but this actually serves as a great reminder of what the digital evidence looked like and its condition. Then you want to store the photographs and other evidence and reports in the case folder. Every case should have its own folder. And so that's so that all the information pertaining to this specific incident are stored together. And then clearly mark the front of the folder with case number, location, etc. Clearly mark the front of the folder with case number, location, etc. Now let's get back to acquiring. So we've talked about a forensic duplicate, a bitstream copy, a forensic copy versus just something called a copy of a file. What's the difference between those? So a bitstream copy copies an entire hard drive partition bit by bit, regardless if this is a node is allocated. And a node is essentially a way that a file is referred to in the file system. And so I'm sure all of you have been on your laptop or your desktop and you've inserted a thumb drive into the USB port and you've copied files back and forth between them. Okay, that's called a logical copy. That's what this is right here. It's called the logical copy. So that logical copy will only copy nodes that are allocated. That is, what that means is it will only copy files that you can actually see on your hard drive. It doesn't capture the deleted files. So what's the difference? So as already said, when files are deleted, their contents do not disappear from the hard drive. Rather, a pointer, and just forget about this, an inode or master file table record is cleared, indicating the node is free. But that's just a single byte. All the contents are still there. Not only that, all the metadata about the file is still there. So it's pretty much everything, all information about the file is still there except that one bit that was flipped. Okay, so once we've captured a forensic copy of the data, we need to authenticate it. It's very important for you, the forensic examiner, to be able to show that what you're working on, that forensic copy, is exactly the same as the original evidence. And we do this through a proof of integrity and timestamping, and those are provided by something called hashing, which is something we discussed in depth in an earlier class. So a hash, or a cryptographic hash, is an electronic fingerprint for an individual file, floppy drive, thumb drive, hard drive, or any type of digital evidence. And this hash value takes any number of bits and compresses them into a finite number, usually somewhere between 128 bits to 512 bits. And in the cryptographic one-way hash video, I'll explain all of this in more detail. And these cryptographic hashes, or the hashing functions, are called one-way hashes. They're called secure hash functions. What this means is every file maps to the exact hash value, and that's a single hash value. And even if you had multiple copies under different names of that file, they will only hash to that single value, which means it's only the contents of the file that matters when calculating the hash, not the file name, not any other metadata associated with the file. And it's very, very difficult to find another file that hashes to the same value. And I want to point this out, that that's probably not true. Well, I mean, that actually is true. But if you can find a file, two files with different contents that result in the same hash, that means there's something wrong with your cryptographic hash algorithm. And again, I go into more depth into that in the cryptographic one-way hash video. So the whole idea behind authenticating the evidence is verifying it. You calculate a cryptographic one-way hash of the original evidence and the forensics image. That is the forensic copy. That is the forensic duplicate. That is the bitstream copy. So that resulting number from the cryptographic one-way hash algorithm is essentially a digital fingerprint. A cryptographic one-way hash algorithm is applied to the contents of the file. The output is a single multi-digit number that is computed just from the contents. And given two files with the same fingerprint, that is the same hash, that means the files are guaranteed to have the same content. No matter what their date or timestamps are, or their names. And here's a quick example I ran on my Mac, and you don't have to do this on Linux because Linux actually provides you with several programs that calculate different hashes. But this is just showing how here I'm using a very old deprecated hash function called MD5, and that was really one of the originals used in forensics. And shows you that for this file, CBA is an Excel spreadsheet. This is the hash value. As we go down, now I'm using the SHA-1, which for years was a government standard on the same file, and you notice that it comes out with a different hash. And you notice how this hash function, the SHA-1, which is 160 bits, is much longer than the MD5, which is 128 bits. And finally, there's the SHA-512, and by the way, SHA stands for Secure Hash Algorithm. Now you have the SHA-512, which is in the family of the current government standards, which is called SHA-2. And notice how long this one is. And I'll explain in an upcoming video why we went from the MD5, what was wrong with that? How we went from the SHA-1, what was wrong with that? Because the SHA-1 replaced MD5. And then the SHA-2 family of algorithms, of which SHA-512 is one of those, replace the SHA-1. So you should never use MD5 or SHA-1 in a government or a law enforcement setting. For your own purposes, it's okay, but you would never want to go into a court of law with hash values that are MD5 or SHA-1, because the defense attorney could have a field day with it, and that will be explained in much more detail later on. So what do you hash exactly? Well, we've already talked about is that we hash the original, that is the hard drive, and we create that bitstream copy of every bit on the hard drive, and then of course we also hash the copy of it. So that's what I just said, the hard drive and the duplicate you hash, and if the two hashes are the same, it indicates the two have the exact same contents. That's critical. And after hashing the original, that evidence drive goes back to the evidence locker. And then you complete the chain of custody form. And it's also important that you hash each file. And notice back here, this is not the way, this is just a demonstration how you can manually run the hash algorithms on a file. That's not the way it's done in practice. Is that, as we'll see later, and you'll get to do this yourselves, is that there are forensics applications where you could ingest, that means you could open in this forensics application an image, and it automatically hashes all the files for you. And the reason we do that is for a couple of reasons, actually. You need to show that the files themselves that you're analyzing don't change during analysis. But also, think about it. If you are searching for a particular file, let's say a graphic, or it doesn't really matter, a movie, an audio, what's the easiest way to find it? Well, realize that the file names can change. So maybe you're looking for Secret Audio 1. Well, maybe you don't have that file named Secret Audio 1 on the hard drive, but maybe it's named something else. So it doesn't really matter what a file is named. If you're thinking about the contents, it's the actual contents. So the way to find that file 100% is to use the hash. And as we'll talk about later, this is something that is used in child pornography cases, because it turns out people who are involved in child pornography, and I don't ever like talking about the subject, but when you talk about digital forensics, a lot of what the FBI does and local law enforcement deals with child pornography. Child pornographers will share these files online, and they're not going to just usually have one or two files. They're going to have hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of files. This is just what they do. I don't know why. You may not take another course in abnormal psychology that will explain why they do this, but they do. They usually have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of files. Well, law enforcement has these files, and what law enforcement does is they will hash these files. And so these files, those hashes for these photos, are incorporated into their forensics applications. And so when they also ingest one of these hard drives from a suspect, they can use those hashes of known child pornography files to identify those files on that suspect's hard drive. And it happens very quickly. And what is the alternative? The alternative is to have the forensics examiner open up a graphics viewer and manually go through the files. Well, if you're talking about hundreds of thousands or millions of files on a hard drive, that's going to take forever. By doing it in an automated fashion, law enforcement can get a quick answer as to whether any child pornography is found on the suspect's hard drive. But this whole process of using this automated way of identifying files goes for any case, including, let's say, sensitive government documents. For example, documents that have been marked secret or top secret or whatever. So when we talk about physical evidence, it's kind of difficult to show that evidence of any kind collected is the same as what was left behind by a criminal. But is that really true for digital evidence? Because if you think about it, computer drives deteriorate slowly. And if a computer isn't on and the hard drive is not running, the bits are not going to be flipping. And that's why it's important that we handle the evidence with care and we authenticate it. Because the defense attorney can't say that all of a sudden, randomly, child pornography or sensitive classified documents showed up on a person's computer, on the suspect's computer. And of course, chain of custody and other handling rules assure to the jury that no unanticipated or introduced changes occurred. Again, we get back to chain of custody. And finally, the third A, we acquired, we authenticated, now we analyzed. Now, I'm not going to go too far into this because we'll be talking about analysis, and you will be doing some analyses throughout this course. So what do you analyze? You've got 1 million files, or let's just say you have 100,000 files. Okay, where do you start? The analysis is dictated by the facts of the case. It's actually not the forensics examiner's job to run the case. It's the detective's case, or whoever is in charge of the case. They're the people who are responsible for relating to the forensics examiner of what types of information that they're looking for. So it could be keywords, it could be terrorist, it could be bomb keywords, or it could be graphics, or it could be hashes of files. And so you're not just going to go in and start exploring. This isn't an exploration. This is a guided exploration based upon the facts of the case as to what the forensics examiners should be looking for. So for example, what type of crime is being suspected of being committed? Is it a hacking case? Okay, then you're going to be looking for hacker tools. Or you could be looking for network connections to the victim's computer. Or is it child pornography? Okay, you're just going to be looking at graphics. Or is it a financial fraud case? So you could be looking for emails that relate to the case. So it really depends on the type of case as to what the forensics examiner is going to be looking for. Child pornography, identity theft, extortion, all of those are going to be different types of evidence usually that will relate to the case. And so that should be driven by the detective that's part of the case. You're not going to go on a fishing expedition. And also what evidence has been gathered. So depending upon what evidence has been gathered will drive how the analysis proceeds. And also, what do you know about the subject? For example, here's something that I've noticed with the younger generation and the older generation. The younger generation, those 12 to 22, use text and they use their phones. What they don't do is they don't email. I find that the older generations, people 50s and above, are more likely to use emails. And that's not a hard and fast rule because I know some people who are older just mainly text. But in general, younger people use text, older people use email to communicate. So that should tell you something about where you should focus your efforts, just the age of the suspect. And there's also naive users, is that people who barely use technology. You could treat them different than somebody who's very technically literate. Somebody who's very technically literate may not just delete the files like a naive user would do, but actually use a digital wiping tool, and we can talk about those later, that will overwrite the contents of deleted files. Or you could have the uber geek, and then they could be using cryptography. And so now you get a computer that is encrypted. Now you need to determine what is the best way of dealing with that encrypted hard drive. So what are some of the common tasks involved with forensics analysis? Viewing thumbnail graphics, but again, that just depends upon the case. What is driving the case? What is the case involved with? Do you need to view thumbnail graphics? Searching for keywords, as I showed before. Are you looking for the words bomb or nitroglycerin or whatever's involved with the case? What kind of case is it? You can also search by file type. For example, if it's a financial case, maybe you're looking for Excel spreadsheets. And you also need to be flexible because just because, let's say you've got a financial fraud case and you're looking for Excel spreadsheets, you come upon another piece of evidence by accident, which leads you to another investigation. For example, there have been cases when a forensics examiner is given a piece of evidence and they're investigating, for example, a financial crime, and they accidentally see a child pornography picture. That means that the case can go into another investigation. And I also want to point out one thing too here is that when searching, you should be searching for evidence that's driven by the case, as I've said before, but also the fact that is part of your investigation, and so it limits the searches that you're going to be doing on the hard drive. And so if it is a financial case and you're looking for financial documents, let's say financial documents and emails that were indicated in the search warrant, and then you come upon a thumbnail of child pornography, you have to stop. the forensics examiner has to stop, because that's not part of the case. What that does allow law enforcement to do is to go back to the judge and say, we found a photo of child pornography, and then to get a new search warrant that now includes child pornography. And then that would allow the forensics examiner to then go ahead and investigate another avenue of the case. What can be used, though, that first photo, which was not part of the investigation, that can't be used against the suspect. But more than likely, if there's one photo, there's going to be a lot of photos. It's also a good idea to interview the suspect to find out what you can to reduce the workload and point to evidence. Because if you understand something about the psychology of humans and you understand something about the suspect, you might be able to get the suspect to tell you exactly the location of certain evidence on the hard drive. And this is one of the applications that we'll be using in this class, and it's free, and it's called FTK Imager. Actually, this is the FTK demo. We'll be using a smaller version of this called FTK for Forensic Toolkit Imager. And essentially what it does is it's an application and where you take your forensic image and you ingest it in here, and then the application will show you what's on the image. And you see here, we're exploring graphics right here. On the left-hand side, it shows you the file structure. If you want to see more specifically what a file looks like and the contents, you can click over here on this pane and here in the middle, and it will show you what the contents look like. And then down at the bottom, it gives you a list of files that are relevant up here. But you notice up here in this tab view, it says Overview, Explore, Graphics, Email, Search, and Bookmark. The nice thing about this application and all forensics applications, it will partition everything into its constituent parts. So this will just show you graphics, this will just show you email, this allows you to search, and so on. And so finally, let's look at some of the common mistakes that are made by the forensics examiner. The first is accidentally altering time and date stamps. Whether you know it or not, time and date stamps are very important in a lot of forensics investigations, because if you want to tie a crime to a particular date and time, if you accidentally change those date and time stamps, there's no way to go back and see what the previous date and time stamps were.